Hello, this is Sue Watkins with the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals. Thank you for joining the webinar. I am part of the team that's developing a chapter on tribes for the 2013 National Climate Assessment. This is going to be the first time that a chapter on tribes will be part of the assessment. Dr. Bull Bennett of Kicksapa Consulting and Dr. Nancy Maynard with NASA are the two convening lead authors for the chapter. Dr. Bennett earned his BS in biology from Black Hills State University and a MS in zoology and physiology at the University of Wyoming. He then worked for tribal colleges in South Dakota, first at Ogallala Lakota College and then Setonka College, before returning to graduate school. Dr. Bennett earned his PhD at the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology, where he studied bison impacts on shortgrass shrub steppe prairie. After completing his PhD, Dr. Bennett worked for the North Dakota Association of Tribal Colleges, first as the science coordinator and then as president and CEO. In 2011, Dr. Bennett was appointed to the National Climate Assessment Development and Advisory Committee by the Secretary of Commerce. Dr. Bennett currently is the president and CEO of his consulting firm, Kicksapa Consulting, LLC, and continues to work with tribes and tribal colleges providing science education, research opportunities, and investigating climate impacts on habitats and marginal populations. During this webinar, Dr. Bennett will give a presentation about the National Climate Assessment, the chapter on tribes, and how you can provide input. And then following his presentation, we're going to ask you to answer a few poll questions, and then Dr. Bennett will field questions that you have for him. And all questions need to be submitted by typing them into the chat box in the upper right part of your computer screen. Dr. Bennett will answer as many of the questions as possible in the time remaining. Please feel free to contact Dr. Bennett after the webinar if you have questions that have not been answered. This webinar is being recorded. ITEP is creating a webinar page on our website and will post the webinar recording and the presentation on the page. And I'll send a link to the page to everyone who registered for the webinar. So with that, Dr. Bennett, please take charge.
Thank you, Sue. I want to extend a sincere gratitude for those of you who joined us on this webinar this afternoon. We are in an interesting time, as you know. We've got a short amount of time and a whole lot of work to accomplish in order to develop the 2013 National Climate Assessment report that will go to Congress and to the President. And so with that, this is also unique in that this is the first time where we've had a full chapter that has been dedicated to the technical inputs of tribal perspectives on our land and our natural resources. And so with that, and given the short amount of time that we have, we are attempting to, or we will accomplish, putting together a chapter that's specific for tribal interests as it relates to climate impacts in Indian country. And so again, I want to thank all of you for your interest and for participating in this webinar. So what I'll be discussing today, I'm going to provide a little bit of background on the National Climate Assessment. I'll also discuss the assessment structure and process, and I'll also talk about the outline of the 2013 report and what it's going to look like. I will give a brief rundown on the assessment activities to date and the timeline on which we're going to be accomplishing things. I'll also spend some time talking specifically about the tribal and indigenous input into the climate assessment. I'll also be talking about the timeline and providing some key logistical contacts that you can reach out to. And at the end, as Sue indicated, I'll be answering, we'll have a question and answer session at the end. But before we'll get to that, there'll be some poll questions that we're going to ask each of you to respond to. So with that, 1990 by executive order, the President mandated that a report be made available to Congress every 4 years. And that assessment, which will integrate, evaluate, and interpret the findings of the program and discuss the scientific uncertainties associated with the findings. The report needs to analyze the effects of global change on the natural environment, agriculture, energy, production and use, land and water resources, transportation, human health and welfare, human social systems, and the biological diversity. And analyze current trends in global change, both human-induced and natural, and project major trends for the subsequent 25 to 100 years. So in 2000, the first report came online, followed in 2009 by the second report. As indicated, the target date for the current report is for 2013. And what's different about these reports is that this is an opportunity for the tribes to have a really strong input into this report to be considered. And also what's different about this is in the past iterations, the focus was primarily on the product, i.e. the report, and not so much on the process. And this time around, the committee is working concurrently on not only developing the report, but also developing an ongoing process that will extend and outlive the 2013 effort on into the 2017 effort and beyond. The goal and vision of the National Climate Assessment, the goal is to enhance the ability of the United States to anticipate, mitigate, and adapt to changes in the global environment. The vision is to advance an inclusive, broad-based, and sustained process for assessing and communicating scientific knowledge of the impacts, risks, and vulnerabilities associated with a changing global climate in support of decision-making across the United States. The makeup of the National Climate Assessment Committee, there are 60 member Federal Advisory Committee members, including 45 non-federal members and 16 federal ex officio representatives. The chair of the committee is Dr. Jerry Melillo of the Marine Biological Laboratory. The vice chairs include T.C. Richmond, Gordon Durr, and Gary Yohe from Wesleyan University. There is also a 13-member executive secretariat. There's a wide variety of expertise and perspectives that make up the committee. They provide advice on both the 2013 report and on the development and ongoing process. The committee is also responsible for authoring the assessment reports to the United States Global Change Research Program that will be the basis of the report to the President and to Congress. So a little better understanding and a visual of what the committee structure looks like. The National Climate Assessment Development Advisory Committee, which has been appointed by the Secretary of Commerce, from which the Executive Secretariat is also appointed by the Undersecretary of Commerce to chair the committee. Within the committee, there are committee members that make up the working groups, and of those, the chapter author teams. So there'll be anticipated inputs from regional teams, from sectoral teams, but for our purposes, the tribal input technical team as well will be helping coordinate the technical inputs for the report. The role of this tribal, as I'll explain, the role of this tribal input technical team will become very, very important, not only in communicating with the working groups, but also in terms of communicating with the chapter author teams as well. So the next National Climate Assessment, we're looking at not only developing the report, but developing a sustainable process with multiple products over time. The new topics, which were not included in previous iterations, will include cross-sectoral studies. We'll be developing a consistent national matrix of indicators. Will be centrally coordinated with multiple partners. There'll be regional and sectoral networks that building on assessment capacity. We'll also be recognizing the international context from which this national assessment resides. We'll be engaging and communicating with multiple stakeholders at the largest scale possible. We'll be coming online with web-based data and tools for decision support. And we'll also be establishing process workshops to establish the methodologies. So the products of the National Climate Assessment, as I indicated, are periodic report or reports to Congress, a dynamic web-based data and products, regional, sectoral, and institutional adaptation and assessment capacities, methodologies for conducting assessments at multiple scales from local to national, and ongoing national evaluations of changes in climate trends, impacts, and their risks. We'll be documenting the process and certainly communicating the information and the products and making those available to the general public. So I want to move towards what the document is going to look like for the 2013 report. So the major sections, the first section will be the scientific basis for climate change. The second section will focus on sectors and sectoral crosscuts. The third section will focus on regions and biogeographical crosscuts. The fourth section will focus on mitigation and adaptation efforts. The fifth section will set the tone and the agenda for climate change science and research into the future. And the last section will focus on establishing and sustaining the long-term climate assessment process for the country. So I want to talk briefly about the sectors. As mandated in the executive order, those sectors include water resources, energy supply and use, transportation, agriculture, forestry, ecosystems and biodiversity, and human health. New to this assessment are the sectoral crosscuts. And these sectoral crosscuts, which will also be chapters within the report, are water, energy and land use, urban infrastructure vulnerability, impacts of climate change on tribal, indigenous, and native lands and resources, land use and land cover change, rural communities, agriculture and development, and impacts on biogeochemical cycles. Not unlike the 2009 report, there will be regional chapters that will be included in the report as well. The difference from the 2009 report to this one is in the 2009 report, those regions were delineated by geographic features. In this case, for the 2013 report, those regions are delineated by political boundaries. But the regions include the Northeast, the Southeast, and Caribbean, including Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, the Midwest, the Great Plains, the Northwest, the Southwest, Alaska and the Arctic, Hawaii and Pacific Islands, including Guam, Northern Mariana Islands, American Samoa, and other minor outlying islands. The biogeographical crosscuts section will focus on oceans and marine resources, coastal zone development and ecosystems with case studies that include the San Francisco Bay Delta, the Chesapeake Bay, and the Gulf Coast. We'll also be focusing on drainage basins with case studies that include the Great Lakes, Colorado River, and Columbia River. What's missing from this list, and certainly near and dear to my heart, is the Missouri River drainage basin. And although the focus of the biogeographical crosscuts for the 2013 report may not include information on the Missouri River basin, that does not mean that the Missouri River basin is not important. In an attempt to recognize and support the ongoing process, additional information and reports specific to the Missouri River drainage and others will be included in supplemental and supporting documentation. So what the committee has accomplished to date, beginning in 2010, the Interagency National Climate Assessment, which was made up by 18 staff from federal agencies, met biweekly from 2010 to produce inputs to be considered by the National Climate Assessment Committee. During that time, they drafted a strategic plan, an outline, and work plan to prepare the committee. Basically, they were setting the table for the climate assessment process. So they were engaged in strategic planning workshops. They development through the the INCA, or the Integrated National Climate Assessment. They had discussions with the national academies in the spring and summer of 2010, getting them prepared to provide critical review of the report. They also requested comments from the public through the Federal Register in September of 2010. The National Climate Assessment and Advisory Committee, which came online in the spring, also revised the strategic plan and work plan in May of 2011. Agency staffing, they provide agency staffing and budget plan, which was completed in October 2010. During that time, there were 14 process workshops were completed between February of 2010 and April of 2011. The National Climate Assessment Development Advisory Committee, which is a NOAA-sponsored FACA, was appointed by the Secretary of Commerce. Meetings began this spring in April, May, August, and our most recent meeting, which occurred in Boulder, Colorado in November. Coming up in January, there will be a meeting of the convening lead authors that will take place in Tucson, Arizona, where we will set the tone and prepare the structure and content, begin looking at the structure and content of what the respective chapters will look like. In July of 2011, through the Federal Register, there was a request for information asking the general public to contribute expressions of interest that identified who they were and the kind of technical inputs that they would like to include or like to deliver to the committee for consideration in the report. And excuse me, beginning in the spring and through the summer until now, there have been regional and sectoral input workshops with the specific goal of identifying technical inputs that can be considered by the committee for the report. And that has been ongoing. So as we step forward, we are prioritizing our near-term activities to support the 2013 report. Concurrently, at the same time, while developing a long-term strategy and capacity to support the process. So we've deployed regional, sectoral, and cross-cutting assessments. The Climate Assessment Committee has formed teams. In some cases, there are agency-led teams. In some cases, there are external teams that responded to the request for information. Those external teams and agency teams responded with expressions of interest that were due in October of 2011. As part of the tribal technical input team, we submitted an expression of interest to meet that October deadline to ensure that there were tribal perspectives that could be considered through this process up until that March 1 deadline. Technical inputs, the cutoff for technical inputs to be considered in the report is March 1 of 2012. After that, it doesn't mean that those technical inputs that come in after the March 1 deadline, it does not mean that they're any less relevant. On the contrary, reports and inputs that come in and are generated post that March 1 deadline are going to be utilized for supplemental and supporting documentation and also for consideration in the 2017 report. We're also in the process of inventorying existing assessments and data sources and developing indicator and scenario strategies. And most importantly, certainly for our purposes, we are building an engagement network of all the stakeholders who would have a vested interest in the outcomes of this report. So specifically, how do the tribes get involved? How can the tribes and indigenous people input into the report? How can the tribes and indigenous people input into the process? This is no small task when we're thinking about 565 federally recognized tribes and Native Alaskan communities. And it's larger than any one person can handle by themselves. And so what we've done is we formed a tribal input technical team consisting of people from across the country who are working both at the federal level as well as at the tribal level and in academia, who are familiar with tribal interests specifically as it relates to climate impacts. And we've gathered this group of people together to coordinate the technical input process for the tribes and indigenous peoples. Those people are Bo Mitchell from the College of Menominee Nation, Sustainable Development Institute, Steve Crawford from the Passamaquoddy tribe, Sue Watkins from the Institute of Tribal Environmental Professionals, Kathy Lynn from the Pacific Northwest Tribal Climate Change Network at the University of Oregon, Jose Aguto from the National Congress of American Indians, Garrett Bogesser from the National Wildlife Federation, Bob Goff and Pat Spears from the Intertribal Council on Utility Policy, Doug Cluck from the Central Region Climate Services Center of NOAA, Nancy Maynard from NASA, who's also a lead author on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Carl Hild from Alaska Pacific University, Victoria Hike-Steer Inupiat, also from Alaska Pacific University, Michelle Davis from Region 10 EPA, Ralph Cantrell, who's with the U.S. Global Change Research Program and also staff for the National Climate Assessment Committee, and myself, representing Keeksapa Consulting. So the roles and responsibilities of this small team is tremendous. First of all, our first charge is to engage. We have to get the word out to Indian country. Let them know about this process and this opportunity to provide technical inputs to the report and also to the process. And as those, many of our technical input team members are also providing inputs themselves from the work that they are doing through their professional fields. Also, the technical team will be coordinating those technical inputs that would come in from across Indian country and assisting the committee in that way. They'll also be assisting the committee in organizing those inputs and providing feedback on those inputs, and certainly providing feedback, or in addition to providing feedback to the committee on chapter structure and content. So in terms of sectoral crosscuts, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about this specific chapter. This is new. This is something that we did not see in previous iterations, but we have an opportunity now. When you think about 565 federally recognized tribes and native villages, that's a lot of potential input. And the chapter itself, we have to refine that down to 8 to 10 pages. That means that not all of the inputs may be considered for inclusion. Some of those inputs may be condensed with other inputs of like manner. And the task of the author team, and also in working with the technical input team, is to refine all of that information into a cohesive 8 to 10 page document that will be considered as a chapter for the report. And certainly we could argue as indigenous people that we have perspectives on each one of those sectoral crosscuts. And indeed that is the case. As each of these chapters are emerging, there are opportunities for indigenous perspectives to be considered as each of those chapters come online. So it's not like we are just allocated just to this one chapter, but there's an opportunity to provide a tribal and indigenous perspective throughout the report. So how the technical team is going about organizing the technical inputs, we're basically taking a regional approach. There are tribes and indigenous people throughout every one of these regions. And so in order to organize that, each member of the technical team has been assigned a region to work with the tribes and indigenous people to coordinate those inputs as they come in. And so again, the tribes that, from the Northeast and from the Southeast, from the Caribbean, Midwest, Great Plains, Northwest, Southwest, Alaska and the Arctic, and Hawaii and the Pacific Islands. Each one of these regions has been assigned an input coordinator as part of the technical input process. Within those inputs, we're encouraging where it's appropriate to provide the tribal perspective, the indigenous perspective on water resources, energy supply and use, transportation, agriculture, forestry, ecosystems and biodiversity, and human health. And as you see, these are the sectors, and each one of these sectors will have their own chapter, but we have an opportunity to provide that indigenous perspective to those sectors as well. Again, we're looking at this, taking a regional perspective in terms of coordinating the inputs that would come in. So The regional technical input coordinators for each of the regions are as follows. In the Northeast, we have Steve Crawford, who is also coordinating the Southeast and Caribbean inputs. In the Midwest, we have Doug Cluck and Bo Mitchell. In the Great Plains, we have Bob Goff, Pat Spears, and myself. In the Southwest, we have Sue Watkins and Sophie Beam. In the Northwest, we have Kathy Lynn and Michelle Davis. In the Alaska and Arctic region, we have Carl Hild, Victoria Hikes Steer, and Michelle Davis. For Hawaii and the Pacific Islands, it'll be myself and Jose Aguto. And on the national level, we'll also, because although it's not an identified region, there's many tribal inputs that are going to be anticipated to be intertribal. And we want to make sure that we can consider those as we move forward in this process. And so coordinating those national inputs will be Jose Aguto, Garrett Bogasser, Nancy Maynard, and myself. So we have an opportunity to participate in this process. Again, in July 13 through the Federal Register notice, we are developing technical inputs. Those inputs contain or are not limited to certainly literature reviews, discussions, papers, and other review papers, case studies, modeling results, interpretation of data, and topical reports, and also providing assessment capacity, hosting meetings and workshops specific to developing technical inputs that can be delivered to the committee for consideration, supporting indicator systems, and establishing network partners and linking the assessments and the impacts of the findings to the constituents. There's also an opportunity by participating in assessment activities hosted by technical input teams. There's been a number of workshops that have come online, as I mentioned earlier, that have come online beginning this last spring through the summer and is ongoing, in which you can engage in those, participate in those workshops. There's one coming up in Oklahoma on December 12th. There's another one coming online at the end of January in Hawaii, and yet another coming on in February in Alaska as well. And so there are a number of workshops and engagement opportunities that you can respond in. And certainly respond to the public comments and provide your peer review as these data and the documents come online and are made available. So how do we input into the national assessment? Well, as I mentioned earlier, in order to meet that October 2011 deadline, the Tribal Input Technical Team submitted an expression of interest. And again, that was to ensure that there was a mechanism for all of the tribal input that would come from across the country to be considered by the committee for the report. We're also asking that if you have access to peer-reviewed literature, that those be made available specific to tribal inputs. We're also considering workshop proceedings and findings, certainly elder testimony, where the knowledge of the traditions and cultural knowledge and knowledge keepers lie. Those can be considered as technical inputs. And so the source information, as you provide those technical inputs and submit those to your regional coordinator, please provide the background information about the source, who, what, when, where. Describe the impacts of climate impacts on the resources that are most important to indigenous peoples. Please provide your primary point of contact, and where it's appropriate, address those specific climate assessment topics, the sectoral topics, and also the regional topics where it's appropriate. And for the source informant, if it is an elder or if it is community knowledge, please respond to what makes them qualified to provide that input. This is going to be a very rigorous process, and so that information becomes very, very relevant as we move forward. I also want to let people know that there is a small amount of funding available to support tribal input workshops to generate inputs to the process and to the report. We do have to observe a March 1 deadline, but if you're interested in submitting inputs that are after March 1, again, we encourage you to do that. And there is some limited funding that is available to support that process. In terms of timeline, production timeline for the report, we're on a fast track here. So in 2011, the expressions of interest in October were submitted. The technical teams came online, not just the tribal technical team, but technical teams representing all of the regions and the sectors as well. Author teams, the process of identifying who the authors for those chapters had been initiated, and those the final findings on that will be reported here shortly. So March 1, as I indicated, is our cutoff for technical inputs for the 2013 report. By June 1, so between March 1 and June 1, the author team is mandated to develop their draft of the chapter, and from that point it will go out to the national academies for review, and also out to the public in a concurrently for review and comments. In December of 2012 through January of 2013, the chapter lead authors and the committee will be revising the draft and taking into consideration those reviews and comments that we got back from the academies and the public. Once we revise the draft, it will go back out to the national academies for final review and to identify any potential showstoppers there might be. By spring of 2013, we're looking at a final document that will be ready for print and layout, both through print as well as online. We'll go through a final editing process, and then by the end of the year, it will be made available to Congress and to the President, both in print and online form. So that's an idea of what the timeline for developing the 2013 report looks like. However, as I mentioned earlier, as important as the report is as a product, so is the process, the climate assessment process. And so we're not too far down the road on developing this process yet. But as we take a bird's eye view into the future and what the process may look like, certainly in 2011 and 2012, we have the regional and sectoral assessments and stakeholder engagement, which is ongoing. And this webinar is a part of that. And certainly we'll have a full draft of the report that's going to be made available for public review in 2012. So 2013, we'll have a full assessment available, but as we move through 2014 on down the line through and beyond 2017, we're also asking for each of the sectors, the regions, the cross-cutting topics, much like the chapter that we're engaged in now. All of that information is still very, very important. So what I'm asking from you is to get involved. Contact your regional technical input coordinator. Again, in the Northeast and in the Southeast is Steve Crawford. In the Midwest is Bo Mitchell and Doug Cluck. In the Great Plains is Bob Goff, Pat Spears, and myself. Sue Watkins and Sophie Beam in the Southwest. Kathy Lynn, Michelle Davis in the Northwest. Alaskan Arctic, we have Carla Hill, Victoria Hike Steer, and Michelle Davis. Hawaii and the Pacific Islands, Jose Aguto, Garrett Bogesser, and myself. And if you have inputs that you want to provide on an intertribal and on a national scale, please contact Jose Aguto, Nancy Maynard, Garrett Bogesser, myself, and Ralph Cantrell. Again, if you are interested in submitting technical inputs, please contact any one of these folks who are part of your region, who are coordinating your regional inputs, and work with them. And I wanted to also list the contact information for each of the technical team members so that you can email them directly. And so again, I'm encouraging you to work with your regional coordinators to ensure that you get your technical inputs submitted and to the committee by March 1 so that they can be considered for the report, or if they come in after March 1, that they can be considered as part of supporting and supplemental documentation to the report process. And so with that, if you're looking for additional information, please go to this website and we'll provide additional information about the NCA process, about the report beyond the scope of which I covered today. And so with that, I'm asking, that concludes the presentation, and so we're asking that you fill out the poll questions that you should be seeing in front of you. And also, once that is concluded, I will take any questions you may have. Okay, so as we complete the poll questions, I would entertain any questions you might have. Please type those questions in the chat section on your screen, and the organizer will field those questions and ask them on your behalf, and I will respond to them to the best of my ability. So are there any questions?
We have our first question. I am involved with collaborative research in Canada with First Nations. One item not discussed in the presentation: how are Indigenous rights going to be protected, in particular the traditional and ecological knowledge from elders, or is there a concern?
Well, first of all, let me extend my greetings to my brothers up north and my sisters up north. In short answer, I want to be clear about technical inputs, especially traditional ecological knowledge, or what they say as TEK. I want to be clear on this. If there is information that is submitted to the technical input team for the committee to consider, that information becomes public record. And so if there are sensitive information, sensitive knowledge that the tribes need to protect, you will need to police that information on your end. Once it is submitted to the committee, it does become public record.
Okay, our next question is, once there has been information generated, what happens next?
Once you, great question. Once you've generated information in the form of a technical input, I'm encouraging you then to contact your regional coordinator to submit that information. The regional coordinators are doing just that. They're coordinating all of the technical inputs per region. That information is then passed on to the committee, and the committee then, as a group, will look at all of the inputs, not just the tribal technical inputs, but all of the inputs, and consider how the information can be best and most appropriately utilized for the chapters. Now again, there are 565 federally recognized tribes and Native Alaskan communities. We're anticipating a huge volume of technical inputs. Our challenge, both through the technical input team as well as the committee, will be to try and refine that information down to 8 to 10 pages. That's going to be quite a challenge for us. And so there are going to be some technical inputs that may be considered for the 2013 report. If they are not part of a 2013 report, they are still extremely relevant, because those specific, either sector-specific topics, or in our case, the sectoral crosscut specific chapter or documentation specific to native lands, can be developed as a supplemental technical report or supporting documentation for the process. So the information does not go away. It's still very relevant and still can be used by the committee.
Our next question, can you provide a copy of the PowerPoint presentation?
Absolutely. At the conclusion of this presentation, copies of this PowerPoint and also copies of the webinar are going to be hosted on ITEP's website. And Sue, do you want to weigh in here on how people will be able to access this information?
Yes. I am in the process of creating a page that will have webinar information, and I will be putting the PowerPoint presentation and the recording of the webinar onto that page. I don't have a URL right now, but as soon as I have one and I have the recording and the presentation on the page, I will send everyone who registered for the webinar the URL so you can go to the site and get the presentation.
Our next question, is there an agenda for the upcoming workshops?
I guess I would ask for clarification on which workshop that you're referring to.
What is the meeting in January about? This comes from Alex Caballo.
Alex, it's good to hear from you. The meeting in January is unique. Although the information that we're going to be working on can be relevant to the climate assessment process, that particular meeting is much outside the scope of the climate assessment process. What we are specifically focusing on doing is developing a document, a user's guide, targeting our tribal leadership on how to get out in front of adaptation for tribal lands. And so the product for that January meeting is specifically a document for tribal leaders.
Our next question comes from Frank Lake. He asks, how are the differences between local tribal TEK and Western scientific study, data, and or from modeling considered? He has a follow-up. Given that these are often at different ecological and socio-cultural scales for adaptation and mitigation strategies.
That is an excellent, excellent question. In this case, how we define our technical inputs and what we qualify as relevant knowledge is uniquely in our hands as Indigenous people. Certainly there's this document is going to be reviewed rigorously, not only by the national academies, but also by the public at large as well. And so that is why it's important that our traditional knowledge and our Indigenous knowledge, that it is well sourced in the way that we see as appropriate. And so if we have an elder that contributes cultural information that has been peer-reviewed over millennia, that is just as relevant as peer-reviewed literature that you would find in any journal. And so it's up to us to appropriately identify the source and to qualify why the person who makes this statement is qualified to make that statement.
Our next question comes from Brandon Parker. He asks, has the 2000 and the 2009 reports influenced federal directives that benefited Indian country? He follows up, if not, is it possible that the 2013 will?
That's a great question. In 1998, Native Peoples Native Homelands 1 conference was sponsored by NASA and was co-chaired by Bob Goff and Pat Spears. That really started the ball rolling in terms of public awareness of Indigenous impacts due to climate change. It really started the conversation. The subsequent report in 2009 moved that ball forward that much further. The 2013 report is a continuation. So in short answer, did it have deep and broad and meaningful impacts in terms of shaping policy for Indian country? I would respond by saying that we are in the process of pushing a boulder uphill. It's going to take more than one push. It's going to take a continuous effort by a lot of people. But what these reports have done has increased the awareness, not only across Indian country, but also across the nation and the world. And so now and it's fostered an environment where that communication and that dialogue can happen. And so indirectly, yes, it has made a difference. But most importantly, we just have to keep pushing. We've got to keep pushing in order for the differences to be felt down the road. Okay, we got about 8 minutes left. Are there any additional questions that you would like to ask?
Yes, I have another question here, I believe from John Daigle. He asks, is there a research protocol or approach when obtaining input with the technical assistance grants?
Can you repeat that question again? I want to make sure I understand that correctly.
Is there a research protocol or approach when obtaining input with the technical assistance grants?
To my knowledge, I'm unaware of a specific protocol that guides that kind of research. For our purposes in terms of providing technical inputs to the report, because we are coming from such a diverse community, in order to capture the diversity of that community, we have not put boundaries on the kind of research or areas from which those technical reports can come from.
We have questions clarifying the workshops in Oklahoma as well as Hawaii, and questions about the agenda and the ability to receive those agendas.
For the Oklahoma meeting, the agenda was generated by a partnership between Haskell Indian Nations and the University of Oklahoma, specifically Rachel Riley and Dan Wildcat, respectively. And so in terms of the agenda for those meetings, I would have to defer to them, but I can certainly make that contact available if you're interested. For the purposes of the Hawaii meeting, again, that agenda is in formation now, or it's coming online now, and so right now the workshop organizers who are putting the workshop together in Hawaii are working to populate that agenda as we speak. Okay, we got about 4 minutes left on our webinar. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the webinar. I want to extend my sincere gratitude to all of you for joining us this afternoon. If you have additional questions or comments, please do not hesitate to contact me, and I'll try and get back to you in a timely way. I also want to thank Kathy Bennett and Sue Watkins for organizing and co-facilitating this presentation. And again, my gratitude to all of you for joining us. Wilalin, Pilamaya. Thank you.